Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2 is finally upon us. So to make sure you're equipped to take the fight to the Xenos and heretics alike, we've rounded up some tips to help you become the most deadly Space Marine you can be. Space Marine 2 puts a huge emphasis on melee combat, and there are 5 unique weapons with their own combos: the Chainsword, Combat Knife, Power Sword, Thunderhammer, and the Power Fist found in the PvE mode. Each weapon has a strength, speed, cleaving potential, and defense stat, all of which can be viewed in the armoring hall, with the Chainsword being the most balanced of the bunch, with both decent range and speed. Meanwhile, the Thunderhammer has great wide sweeps, but is one of the slower weapons. One of the most important stats to take note of is the defense style of the weapon. The fencing style increases the window of your perfect parries, block has no perfect parry window but allows for better blocking, and balanced sits firmly in the middle, offering both styles of defense. In addition, each weapon has different combos that consist of tapping the melee button or holding it down. You can check the combos for your currently equipped weapon by bringing up the pause menu. Keep in mind that you cannot use your melee weapon with a heavy firearm equipped. Instead, your Space Marine will swing his gun at his foes for minimal damage. Some melee weapons are also more tailored to fighting swarms or individual targets. This is showcased here in the weapon menu. The Combat Knife is great for a one-on-one fight, but when surrounded by masses of Tyranids, the wide sweeps of the Thunderhammer may be more appropriate. Many weapons will also have combos that deliver wider sweeps or area of effect damage, so be sure to check the weapon menu and learn the right combo for the right situation. While you're slashing and bashing your way through enemies, you'll likely see blue and orange glowing orbs. These indicate which actions must be taken in order to avoid incoming attacks. Blue means counter and orange means dodge. If you counter or dodge a bigger enemy at the right time, you'll be able to follow up with a gun strike. After a perfect dodge or counter, you'll see a red crosshair on an enemy. Simply press fire and your Space Marine will automatically shoot it. Gun strikes are especially useful on elite enemies or bosses that rush you down. A well-timed dodge paired with a gun strike can interrupt combos and make short work of a tough enemy. Insta-killing gun strikes and counters against smaller enemies also work the same as executions, in that they will both return a section of your armor. It takes some practice, but if you pay attention to the enemies you're fighting, you may notice that they also use moves that don't trigger a red or blue circle. These can also be parried and dodged. You may not always get a counter or a gun strike out of it, but it can help keep the paint on your armor intact. Space Marine 2 may look like Gears of War, but finishes feel more Doom-like. If you see an enemy glowing red, click the right stick and you'll be rewarded with a gory, blood-soaked finisher. Not only do finishers look incredible, but they can get you out of a sticky situation. A successful finisher is the most effective way to armor up. Normally, a Space Marine's armor refills over time, but an execution will automatically refill a chunk of armor.
They never learn.
Additionally, while you need to be close to a stunned enemy to activate a finisher, you don't need to be that close. If you're a few meters away and press the execution button, your Space Marine will automatically cover the gap and perform the kill animation. It's also worth noting that enemies stay stunned for quite a while, so you don't need to rush them down the second they glow red. Your pistol can also be a useful tool in helping you create opportunities for executions, as the regular bolt pistol at range can sometimes be enough to put smaller enemies into an execution state with just a couple of shots to the body. It is also worth noting that counters and executions are a great way to create space for yourself, as even insta-kill counters against small Tyranids will knock back any enemies surrounding you. But counters, executions, and even normal attacks can also be used to recover some health. When you receive damage, take note of your health bar. The white portion is the amount that can be recovered by dealing damage, similar to how Bloodborne's combat works. And a counter or execution will be able to refill a large portion of that health bar in a single strike. Being aware of this system may make you feel a little braver when wading into hordes, and wide sweeps of the melee weapon can often be just enough healing to keep you steadfast in the thick of the fight. There are a lot of firearms in Space Marine 2, and it's important to know what each does, as well as their strengths and weaknesses. Like the melee weapons, you can check out their stats in the armoring hall, but here's a quick rundown. Bolters are the tried and true assault rifles of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, and there are a ton of variations on this iconic rifle. Burst fire bolters, heavy bolters, battle rifle bolters, and so on. Some bolters even have a secondary function like a grenade launcher or a scope. While aiming, click the right stick and you'll either look down your scope or ready your grenade launcher. There is also a lot of utility to be found with the different bolt rifle variants and other weapons too. For example, the bolt sniper rifle can stun enemies with headshots and set them up for executions. Plasma weapons are great against larger or armoured enemies, and charged plasma shots can inflict area of effect damage as well as stagger. Heck, a fully charged heavy plasma incinerator can turn Xenos into chunks with a single shot. You can tell when you're landing a headshot by the style of hit marker. A single cross means a hit, a double cross is a headshot, and a red cross means a kill. If mobility or running and gunning is more your thing, then you may favour the carbines, as they have much better accuracy firing from the hip on the move than weapons like the plasma incinerator or heavy bolt rifle. You may also want to consider using melter weapons if you favour close combat. Not only are they extremely powerful at close range, performing like a superheated shotgun, but a single shot can also stagger and interrupt enemies. So weaving a quick melter shot in between melee combos can keep enemies from striking back. Alongside primary and secondary weapons, Space Marines also have access to heavy weapons like the heavy bolter and the multi-melter. These are basically more powerful versions of their primary weapon counterpart. But whether found in campaign or used in PvE, with a heavy weapon equipped, you won't be able to use a melee weapon. Executions are vital for survival in Space Marine 2, and while I know they're also satisfying as hell, there is a good reason not to rush into them as soon as your enemy starts flashing red if you're playing as a squad. Teamwork makes the dream work, so instead of snagging that execution for yourself if you're full on armor, tag a stunned enemy for a wounded or overwhelmed teammate instead. I found this to be vital when playing on higher difficulty co-op missions. There were many times where a squad mate was about to go down, but was saved by the invincibility frames and armor regeneration of a well-timed execution. So be sure to share those killing blows with your friends. It's a good idea to keep track of the Tyranid synaptic creatures during combat. Basically, the big ones. Killing these will cause the lesser Tyranids surrounding the elite enemy to collapse or become vulnerable. But when combat becomes chaotic, you'll need to weigh up the pros and cons between focusing these high value targets and clearing the hordes surrounding you. Sure, it can be beneficial to put your attention towards taking down the synaptic warriors, but in doing so you may become surrounded by Hormagaunts. And while their claws are much smaller, in large enough numbers they can quickly take chunks out of your health and armor. In these situations, it can often be more worthwhile to focus on dodging the attacks from elite warriors while focusing your strikes on the lesser enemies until you can thin their ranks and make some space, or rely more on counters and gun strikes to deal damage to the synaptic creatures instead. Although, if there's a bunch of ranged warriors, you may be better off creating space and maneuvering towards those enemies rather than weather the storm. Also be aware of enemies such as zoanthropes that can buff the Tyranid hordes, and if they come in pairs, one will shield the other, meaning you'll have to divide your fire to take them down. Some ranged bioforms of Tyranid warriors are armed with a weapon called a Barbed strangler. These are the weapons that shoot pods that erupt into barbs that strangle you. In large numbers, these can become a real nuisance, slowing your movement speed, clouding your vision, or boxing you into an area. But you are actually able to destroy these nasty little traps by shooting the spore at the center of the mass of strangling barbs. It is also possible to shoot them apart before they sprout, but if you don't manage to do that in time, a few bolt shots into their spiky center should do the trick and clear the way for you. And speaking of poisons, be careful when fighting Raveners, as not only will they burrow underground and attack from below, but as they slither around the arena, they will leave a trail of deadly poison, so watch your step. Strangling poison isn't the only status effect you need to keep aware of though. While poison will cloud your vision in a sea of green and sap away your stamina, enemies like the Zoanthrope can inflict concussive effects that will turn your vision blurry for a short period of time. Although that isn't as bad as quite literally losing your mind. Enemies like the Thousand Suns Marines will start to build up status effects every time they land a hit on you. If that bar fills up, you will start seeing imaginary enemies for a short period of time. They won't be able to do damage to you, but they look real enough that they can distract you from taking down the foes that are chipping away at your health. You'll know you're fighting the real deal though if the heretic in your crosshairs doesn't disappear the moment you make contact with them or land a shot from your bolt gun. Amidst the chaos of combat in Space Marine 2, it's easy to forget to take in your surroundings, but it's worth looking around while traversing through the levels or after an intense battle. Crates can be found across the campaign and in PvE, and these can contain valuable supplies, from ammunition pouches, grenades, or even healing stims. The extra stims and grenades in particular are extremely valuable in the game's higher difficulties. There are also portions of the campaign missions where you can find powerful weapons such as multi-melters, plasma incinerators, or thunderhammers tucked away off the beaten path. Back to PvE missions though, it's also worth a little exploration to find hidden armoury data which can be used to unlock weapon tiers, gene seed containers that add a nice XP boost, guardian relics which give you a free self-revive, armour boosts for a bit of extra protection, or even data pads if you fancy a little lore. The environments of Space Marine 2 also feature a number of hazards and traps that can be turned against the enemy. I know I don't need to tell you that the red barrels across the campaign and PvE operations are going to explode when you shoot them, but the amount of carnage they can really cause cannot be understated. Although in my experience, it was often more beneficial to leave them intact and wait for the best opportunity to detonate them. In areas where Tyranids will start climbing walls, an explosive barrel can cause the pesky nids to tumble down. But blowing up a barrel and taking a synaptic creature with it can create a satisfying chain reaction of collapsing Xenos. But there are also plasma canisters scattered around the map too, which can be detonated with equally gratifying effect, and in the jungles of Kadaku, these spiked plants can also be shot, causing them to explode like a thorny grenade, skewering surrounding enemies. Not only that, but some of the PvE maps feature traps you can activate yourself. As you can see here, during the final part of the Inferno mission, one Marine can activate a gas trap, while the other can ignite it, causing the lower ground to erupt into flames, burning the assaulting nids into a crisp. So always be alert on how you may use your environment as a weapon against the Xenos and heretic threats. If you feel as though the waves of enemies during operations are never ending, then be sure you're keeping your eyes open for elite Xenos and heretics calling in backup. Some of the reinforcement waves that these units summon can be pretty massive, and themselves contain units that can also call in backup. So if you're not careful, you can snowball into being overwhelmed, especially in the higher difficulties. Take note of this symbol as well as the associated sound effects, signaling that an enemy is attempting to call for help. Be sure to focus this enemy and work towards knocking them out of this animation. If they're close, start engaging in melee, and be sure to throw in plenty of heavy attacks to stagger them. If you're far away, you can try to go for headshots. 2 to 3 should stagger the enemy, or if you have a plasma weapon, a fully charged shot usually does the trick. While we're talking about reinforcements though, be aware that the Thousand Sun Sorcerers can actually resurrect singular Rubric Marines with magic. It's a bit harder to tell when this is happening, especially while you're in battle, so try to keep an eye on these dastardly psychers. The heretic cultists can also be sacrificed to summon a Rubric Marine. So if you see one of them start floating and glowing, make sure to dispatch them before they go pop, and a traitor Astartes takes their place. But don't worry about those mortal men too much, you can just run right through them and take them out with sheer bulk alone. I also want to recommend that you take on the trials in the armoring chamber, especially if you're experimenting with a new class in PvE. Not only are these great at showcasing the unique pros and abilities of the classes, but an A rank in each of these will also grant resources that can be used to purchase perks or the next tier of weapon. With 3 across 6 classes, that's at least 18 pieces of armoury data for you to use in expanding your arsenal. We'll have a deeper guide about the co-op PvE classes coming very soon, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that. But those are just about all of the hints I've got for you today. If you come up with any other tips during your time with Space Marine 2, leave them in the comment section below, and maybe with enough we'll do a follow-up video to share with our fellow Astartes. Remember, knowledge is power, but there is no need to hide it well. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.